Hello, everyone. We'll be starting Matthew in just a moment. I just wanted to tell you hi and hope you're doing well. Um, I hope everyone is staying safe and is doing really well. If you ever need anything, just let me know. Uh, this is a little bit different with the times that we've had and the everything that's going on. We've had to resort to unusual techniques. This is definitely a first for me. I've never done a online recorded Bible class before. It's a lot different from my usual Bible classes. I'll be the only one speaking, which is unfortunate. I'm hoping when we come back together, we're able to meet again together. We can maybe review some of this and I can get some of the points and comments and questions that you all have had and you all build up throughout this time. Hopefully you've had a chance to look over the worksheet I sent a couple of days ago and you're able to read the section, have already prepared and thought about it. We're going to be studying Matthew chapter 5, verses 1 through 16. This is an incredible passage and at the start of his first discourse, and it's a really powerful passage. So I hope you've been able to read over that, look over that, maybe look over the questions that I've sent out with that worksheet. You've been able to really prepare for it so that this time of Bible study can be the best it possibly can. So, in just a little bit of a review, we will be we've been looking at the first several chapters of the book of Matthew. This is kind of the chart that we've kind of constantly looked back on. The first few chapters were kind of introduction to Jesus, how Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. It was prophesied from way before, and Matthew's just laying down, like, this happened, and this is a fulfillment of what Isaiah prophesied, or Jeremiah, or Hosea, whoever it was prophesied of it. And Jesus just goes down the line of fulfilling everything that he was intended to fill. And then we got to the baptism of Jesus by John the Baptist, and how that was a marker of the voice crying out in the wilderness, as Isaiah says. And then afterwards, he was tempted, and we looked at how he was tempted and maybe some good ways of how we can deal with some temptation as well. And then finally, he finally begins his ministry, what he came on earth to do. We saw him begin his ministry and call his first disciples, and then start casting out demons and healing people, and bringing the people start bringing the paralytics and the people with various diseases and pains, and he heals just all of them. He just takes care of them. And so he's beginning his ministry on earth and confronting confronting evil and restoring God's reign on the earth, because sickness and everything like that is part of Satan's hold on the earth. And so he's getting rid of that. And then we move on to his first discourse, which is the Sermon on the Mount, which is 3 whole chapters, from chapter 5 to chapter 7. It's a huge section of a narrative that he uses. And really, if you look at the body, I encourage you to read it all at once. You look at the whole thing all at once. He opens up with the Beatitudes, which we'll get to in a minute. But then he moves on to how Christ came to fulfill the law, and then how he is holding his people to a higher standard. Because this is basically the manifest of those who want to enter God's kingdom, those who want to be a part of God's kingdom. And so these characteristics and these things that he talks about in this Sermon on the Mount are not just what a person must do, but what a person must be to be part of the kingdom. And I'll emphasize that point. It's not just a checklist of things that person must do, but it is what a person must be to be part of the kingdom. The kingdom, of course, is a big part of Matthew. It spans the whole book, the emphasis on the kingdom and the king, that is Jesus. And so that's a big emphasis in this kind of Sermon on the Mount, is who is part of the kingdom. How are the people of the kingdom supposed to act, and how are they supposed to be different? And he starts with the attitudes and the beatitudes and how there should be salt and light. And then throughout the rest of the discourse, he goes into various topics. He goes into 12 select topics of how the people of the kingdom should be different from the world. He looks at anger and lust and divorce and oaths and retaliation and loving your enemies and giving to the needy and praying and fasting and being anxious for nothing and then judging others, and then how we should ask God for things before finally basically saying some general principles of how you should live. And so he starts by general attitudes. We're going to look at those in 1 second, the Beatitudes. And then he it gives examples. He makes specific analogies and specific examples for how a person of the kingdom would act in these different situations, how they be separate and apart. And so it's what a person must be, not simply what a person must do. But let's get into our section. We'll be doing Matthew 5, verses 1 through 16. That's kind of the general attitude part. So let's jump in there, let's read that, and then let's see what we can get from this great passage. So starting in verse 1. Seeing the crowds, he went up on a mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. And he opened his mouth and taught them, saying, Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So we have this opening dialogue from Jesus. And I want you to kind of look back to the end. If you have your Bibles with you, look towards the end of this dialogue, all the way in chapter 7, at the very end. And I want you to really put yourself in the crowd and what they're thinking. We are told what they were thinking at the end of chapter 7. It says in verse 28, chapter 7, verse 28, and when Jesus had finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one who had authority, not as scribes. And that's kind of the end result. And as put yourself in the crowd, because these people in the crowd would not have expected this whatsoever. They wouldn't have expected this to be the manifesto of Jesus, the basically who a person needs to be a part of his calling. This is not what people would say. This whole section goes against everything that was common knowledge in that day, and really against the Pharisees all through it, especially when we get into specifics. He says, don't be like the Pharisees in their fasting or their praying. Don't be like the Pharisees in these ways. Instead, you need to be better. And he says that over and over again. And these things have been talked about and preached about many, many a time, but it's because they're so key to understanding who Jesus is. And if we don't understand these characteristics, then we don't really understand Jesus or God. And so we need to really look into what each one of these are. I don't really want to go super in depth into each beatitude because my plan originally for the year was in our the kind of the song devos that we did a couple of weeks ago, in which we had a couple songs, and we would have like a 5 to 10 minute talk, and then a couple more songs, and 5 to 10 minute talk, and then finally have the final talk with the invitation song. That thing that we did, I was wanting to do each one of those around the beatitude. The one we did a couple of weeks ago was being blessed and are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And I want to delve into each one of those a little bit more in those, but I think we need to kind of hit each one of these at least a little bit as we go through it and we learn about it. So let's look at this first verse. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. This probably the Sermon on the Mount happened just south of Galilee, in one of the mountain regions there. It seems to be a prominent mountain because it says he went up on the mountain. So there was a prominent mountain there that people would have known and turned to. And so he went up there. He brought all his disciples around to him, and he opened his mouth and taught them. And so this is what he tells them. And the first thing he tells them is, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And really this is something that not many people would have thought. Goes against, again, everything people would have thought in that day. When you talk about the word blessed, some people talk about it as happy. It really goes beyond just being happy. It goes beyond just being really just exuberant happiness. Blessedness, I think, in my definition, is a combination of joy, contentment, and completeness. So a little bit of all three of those. Joy, which is something that can never be taken away from you. You always have. You're joyful. It's a way of life. It's an attitude. You have contentment, where you're okay. You're happy with what you got. You're joy with what you got. You're okay. You're not trying to get more stuff or more things. You're okay. You're content. And then completeness, that this is what I was here for. This is a purposeful, fulfilled life. And so I think blessedness is a combination of all those three things. And so he's saying, this is how you have blessedness. This is how you have joy in this life. Which, I mean, if you think about it, how many people in this world chase those things? How many people chase contentment or completeness, being fulfilled, having a purpose life, being happy and joyful? How many people chase those things? And how many people try to find those things fulfilled in their job or their money or their career or whatever it is in their life that tries to fulfill them? And right off the bat, he says something that was totally counterculture to them is, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Who is going to make it to the kingdom of heaven? Who is going to be the ones who make it to this kingdom that has been long prophesied? Is the ones that are poor in spirit, which is really kind of opposite to everything that we are taught and that we are made to believe today, especially as Americans. We are taught to be strong and independent. I don't need no man. I don't need no woman. I don't need anyone else. Like, I can handle myself. I can pull myself up from my own bootstraps. And really, that is just not what poor in spirit is whatsoever. Being poor in spirit means you're completely dependent on God. You're 100% dependent on God. And you rely on him for everything, and that he is your end-all, be-all of everything. And that's really what we should have, is that complete dependence on God. And if you kind of compare what he says here to what he says in Luke 6:20, which is the Sermon on the Plain, which is very similar to this, but different discourse. He really points out the ones who are physically poor are the people who realize their dependence. It's the ones who realize that they don't have a lot. And so they are made to be dependent on God and look to him for everything. And that's something that we kind of miss as Americans, as people who are part of the most blessed society ever. We don't think we need anyone. And maybe what a good thing about crisis and maybe this pandemic is, we realize we need God. We need our every dependence. I know many people have lost their jobs. Several more haven't been able to see family or get out of the house. It maybe this is a wake up call to a lot of people that we need God and we need to depend on Him, because those are the people that are going to reach heaven. It's not the people who are proud or stuck up or think they could do it all by themselves. It's the people that rely on Him. And then he moves on to verse 4, which is, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." Um, and this isn't just like a sadness, oh, I'm a little sad. This is a intense, sobbing, mournful state. This same word is used in Septuagint of Jacob when he mourns for Joseph when his brothers sold Joseph into slavery. This is, and it records in that account how day over day and night after night he just cried himself to sleep. His brothers could hear his father's wailings for many, many days. It was just so much sorrow, so much pain. This is similar to the tax collector in the parable of the tax collector and the Pharisee, where the tax collector can't even look up to heaven, but he just hangs his head and beats his breast and says, "I am a sinner." And he just has that mournful state. And so this isn't just a little bit sad. This is people who are truly devastated and mourning. But the question needs to be asked, what are they mourning for? And I think part of this is there's several answers to this question. One, I think maybe the most obvious, is we need to mourn for our sin, for the damage that we've done to our relationship with God, the loss of fellowship with God. It reminds me of David when he sinned with Bathsheba, and you read his psalm. He's sorry because he realizes that he's lost his fellowship and his relationship with God. And he says, "Please don't take your hand away from me again. Don't take me away from your presence again. I want to be near you." And he mourns for that. But I don't think it's just limit to that. I think this is also, we need to mourn for the state of the world, the wickedness of the world, that there is sin and there's death and there's sickness and there's people who make bad choices and people suffer because of that. And we need to mourn for that, because that is not how God created it. That is not how it should be. And so we need to mourn for that as well. And it says that in the end, they shall be comforted. It's because if we are truly sorry for our sins, we will be comforted because we will be in God's presence. And in Revelation, it talks about how He will wipe every tear away from our eyes, and we will be in a place of constant rest where there will be no sickness, no death, no bad people making bad decisions and having consequences for those. We will be comforted in the presence of God. And I don't know how that all works, but I have faith that it will be that way and that we will be comforted. But it only happens to those who truly mourn. And then he moves on to the third beatitude. "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." And meekness is not weakness. Meekness is not weakness. I think a lot of times people confuse that. Those who think that Jesus just meant, you should become a doormat for everyone. That's not what he's talking about here. Meekness is strength under control. Strength under control. It really comes from bridling a horse, a great stallion, or Clydesdale. It comes taming that horse and making it subservient to its rider. Now, did that horse lose any of its strength at all? No, it's still powerful. It can still do a lot of things and be really strong, but it is under control. It's not wild anymore. And that's what we need to be as people. Just because we lose, just because we become Christians does not mean we have to suddenly become destitute. We have to throw it all of our life. We can't we act like we are no good and we stink and we have no talents or whatnot. No, when we turn to God as a Christian, we bring all those talents and all those strength and we focus it and we bring it under His control. We don't use those talents and those abilities just for ourselves or whatever we want as a wild, rampant person. We bring it under control and we use those to His benefit. And those are the people that shall inherit the earth. I mean, if you look at the Old Testament over and over, it's not the strong, the proud, the independent that are the ones that inherit the earth, that win the battle, that God uses. It's the ones who are meek. It's Gideon who thought, I who are you going to use? I'm going to lead the Israel out of captivity? I don't think so. It is Moses, who is called the meekest man on the face of the earth, that led him out of captivity as well. It is the people who were humble, and then they were the ones that inherited the earth that God gave them. Both the devil and God promised you that you can have it all. You can have the whole earth, but God's the only one that delivers. They will be the ones that inherit the earth. And then the fourth beatitude is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, uh, for they shall be satisfied. And this is really our intense desire to be with God. It's not just hungry and thirsty, it's hungry and thirsty for righteousness, to be like God, to be like Him. In Isaiah, he chides the Israelites um, for not thinking like God and not being like God. He says, for your ways are higher than our ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. That's what God says. And what he's saying is basically, you need to get your ways and your thoughts on my level. You need to bring it to my level. And that takes a hunger and a thirst for righteousness, just to be with Him and to be like Him and everything. And it denotes not a checklist. This is not a checklist of how to become part of the kingdom. This is a hunger and thirst to always get better. You can always see this in new Christians versus those who had been Christians for a long time and have let their hunger and thirst for righteousness abate. When a Christian comes out of the water and they're on fire and they have zeal, they want to know, they want to learn, they want to know everything about God, and they want to do all they can to help. And that's the kind of people they could be, as opposed to people who have let that hunger and thirst for righteousness abate in their life and become full on the things of this world, and they just kind of show up to church just for a checklist, just to do what I've always done, or to show up and I will get into heaven. That's how it should be. But we need to have that constant hunger and thirst, for we will be satisfied. We will be the ones who are satisfied. We will get the righteousness. We will be in the presence of God where there is always righteousness. And then the fifth beatitude is, blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. This is kind of in the middle um, of the chiasm. So you can break each one of these down, and you do what is in the middle, what is, and in the middle is usually what is the most important. It's this one: blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. And I think that's very interesting. I'm often thought of several of Jesus's um, parables about debt and forgiving those who owe a debt, and how if we want to be forgiven of our sins and our debt to God, we need to forgive other people of their debt. And we need to forgive them of everything they've done to us. And the prayer that he's about to talk about, he talks about, forgive us of our debts as we forgive others their debts. And so we need to be able to have mercy on other people if we should expect to receive mercy ourselves. And really, it goes beyond just forgiving someone of their debt. It's also having a compassionate heart, a giving heart, to give them whatever they need. not just forgiveness, not just letting them off the hook for whatever they did to you, but also going up above and beyond what is expected to give them everything they need. And really, that takes a soft heart. That takes someone that is compassionate and willing to help others. Someone who's a giver, who just gives out of their means, that not just their abundance, but what they truly need, and they just give it out because they are merciful. They see someone in need, and they want to have mercy on them. And if we do that, I think we shall receive mercy too, uh, in this life and the next. We shall receive the same mercy. And then verse 8, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Um, we kind of talked about this a little bit a couple of weeks ago when we did the Devo and songs kind of helping the lesson that we learned. But this really talks about how we need to desire to be pure in heart. And I want to focus on kind of the second bit a little bit more in this one. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. I mean, this is what everyone's longed for. I mean, that's what everyone has wanted, to see God. And the closest person in the Old Testament that got to that was Moses, and he just saw the backside. And when he did, his face illuminated for several days. And so that's the closest they got. And so every person wanted to see God, but it was impossible. But Jesus says, if you're pure in heart, you will see God. And I think he means this by a couple different ways. One, I think in heaven we'll see God pure in heart. We stay on track and we're pure as God's pure, as First John talks about. We will see God. We'll see him in heaven. We'll see him on his throne. That will be a great day. But also, I think it's implied that if we are pure in heart, we will see God in each other, in our actions. First John 3 and also chapter 4 also talks about this, where if you act kindly to one another, you're the people that you need to be, other people will see God in you. And that is the clearest picture of God that we can get on earth today, is when we act and we are people of God. And then we move on to blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the sons of God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be the sons of God. And does this mean that we can never, ever be in any trouble? I don't think so. Obviously, if you look at Paul's life, it looks like he was in trouble every step of the way. But that's not because he was going around trying to stir up strife or trouble. It's because he preached God's word, and then people took offense to it, and so they caused trouble. And so I don't think it's meaning that we should try to run away from every disagreement or every awkward meeting or awkward conversation or every argument ever. But I think it has much to do with us. We need to live at peace with the world. First Thessalonians kind of says the same thing about as much as it is up to you, have peace with all men. And that is, you live your life, you work hard at your job, you are a good father, a good mother, a good son, a good daughter, a good brother, a good person that you need to be. And as much as it's up to you, you try to live at peace with all men. You try to respect your neighbors and try to do to them as you want to be done to you. You're nice and you're polite. You do those kinds of things. And then when there's times where you need to stand up, I think you do that. And you stand true to what God tells you to be. And those are the things you need to do. But that shouldn't be, people shouldn't have trouble with God's word, not as you as a person. And I think that's a key there. And really, this is the kind of the opposite of what people thought the Messiah would be. A lot of people thought the Messiah would be someone who comes in and leads a charge against Rome and brings out people against Rome and is going to lead Jews to victory. But instead, he came in peace. He was a peacemaker. He rode on a donkey, not a horse. He was a peacemaker. That's what he came to do. And he came to do to bring peace between God and men. And that was one of the first things he came to do, was to bring peace between God and man. And that's what we all should long for, is to have peace between God and men. And if we do that, we should be called sons of God. Israel thought they were part of God's people. But what Jesus says here is, no, just because you're Israel, not part of God's people, you have to be peacemakers. But he takes it one step further and says, you're not just going to be God's people, you're going to be sons of God, which is inheritance. You're going to be part of the elite people, which is really cool and would have caught their attention in that day. And then we kind of move into these last two, and these last two kind of go together. So it's about persecution. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Notice that goes, the same thing is said in the first one, in poor spirit, for theirs is the kingdom. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. That is the same thing. And it's a inclusio, which is just a fancy term saying that they repeat the first one and the second one to note that this is kind of the end thought. But he doesn't just stop there. He kind of goes on and adds a little part at the end to kind of highlight it. And in verse 11, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So this is what he talks about, is you're going to be, if you're a disciple, if you're part of the kingdom people, you're going to face persecution. That's just how it is. And I think there's two extremes that we as modern Christians can go. One, I believe that if you're not struggling in some aspect in this modern world and this evil world to be the kind of person that you need to be to uphold the righteousness and everything that you talked about before this, I think maybe you need to reevaluate your life, and that you may not be upholding the values that Jesus says that you need to be upholding if you're not struggling at least a little bit. But at the same time, we also don't need to create persecution for ourselves in order to be righteous. And a lot of people will create, I wouldn't say a lot of people, some people will create persecution for themselves, not because for righteousness' sake, as it says in verse 10, and because they are proclaiming God's word and people are taking exception to it, like Paul is an example of. They're not following Paul's example. They're not being persecuted for righteousness' sake. They're being persecuted because they're annoying and they're making a scene and that they're spreading the gospel wrongly. And that is a total different matter. And so I think there's a balance here where we need to feel the world and the evil that we're in, but also we don't need to bring persecution on ourselves. We need to be the people that we need to be. Again, we need to be at peace with all men as much as it's relying on us. But we also need to say what God tells us to say. There's certain times where you may need to say something uncomfortable, and you're going to need to say it. And so we need to understand that all disciples will suffer to some extent, but we need to not be sad about it, which is kind of an interesting point. In verse 12, he says, rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. These are instead of being sad and be distraught because you're persecuted, rejoice and be glad. How many times in Acts did we see that? When Peter and John were scourged because they were preaching about Christ, they went away rejoicing for that they could that they were persecuted for his sake. Paul and Silas, when they were in Philippi and were scourged and in prison, they prayed and sang songs and rejoiced that they were persecuted for righteousness' sake. These are the type of people that we must be. When persecution comes, we must rejoice. We need to rejoice. We need to be that kind of person. And then he kind of wraps this all up, this first kind of introduction section of the attitude of a person may be, with these few sentences on being the salt and light, verses 13 through 16. I think it's very very important. I don't think that Beatitudes cannot be separated from these verses. So let's read them and then I'll explain what I mean. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how should its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on the hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. And the reason I say that these cannot be separated from the Beatitudes is what Jesus is saying is, you can have all these things on this list. You can be poor in spirit, you can mourn for your sins and for the world, you can be meek, you can hunger and thirst for righteousness, you can be merciful, you can be pure in heart, be peacemakers, you can be persecuted for righteousness' sake, and when you're persecuted, you rejoice and be glad. But if no one knows about it, if no one knows that you're these kinds of people, and for the specific reason of being part of God's kingdom, you're not just a good person. You're not just someone who, just a good person who kind of just is a good person. You're a good person because God made you a good person. And if you do all those things, but you are not salt, you're not light, you're not pointing the way to God, then it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. You have to be salt. You have to be light. You have to be the people that show the dark world light. And I love the analogies he uses here. So in verse 13, he talks about being the salt of the earth. And in that day, salt was super important because, one, it brought taste, but also brought a way to keep meat. And we don't think about it today, but salt in that day could lose its taste after a while. And basically what he's saying here is, after salt has lost its taste, what good is it? What good is it if people cannot taste that salt that's different, that it's something that it should be? How can saltiness be restored? There's no way to add saltiness for it. And what good is it? Because if you put salt on your piece of meat, it's not going to do any good. If you put it on your food, you're not going to taste it. And then you can't even really throw it in the field because that will hurt the crops and that will make the land barren. So you just kind of throw it down the path and it gets trampled out. And if we are not salty people, we're not people that that make people want to know why we're different, why we have that unique taste. If we're not type of people who make people want more, because what salt does is eventually you will want water. You want something to balance the salt. You want something to you'll seek water. If we are not the type of people that make people seek water, seek the baptism of Jesus Christ in their life, and we're not those kinds of people, what good are we? What good are we if we're not that type of people? And then to go along with that analogy, in verse 14 through 16, he talks about light. Light, how reveals the world and A city cannot be hidden if it's on a hill and it has light. And we need to be a light of the world. Now, would you, as a people, as a lamp, if you light a lamp, would you put it under a basket? No, you'd put on a stand and let its light shine. So the same way, what is good is a Christian who is hidden, who's covered up, who hides themselves from the rest of the world. It does not stand out. What good is that, Christian? No good at all. And so what we need to do is let our light shine. And this is basically how Christ and Paul and Peter and everyone in the Bible did evangelism. They let the light shine before others, and then others saw their good works and who they were and the beatitudes that we must have, and then they give glory to God, the Father who's in heaven. That's how it works. And really, I'm looking forward to the next couple of sermons that I plan on hopefully doing through the same format. Because I hope to, through Genesis 1 and 2, we'll be looking at that this Sunday and show how it's always been the same. Like us, our job is to show Christ's image, God's image in us. And then the next Sunday after that, I'm hoping to do a sermon on First Peter, in which Peter is saying the same thing. This is how you get others to look at God. This is how you get to point others to God. This is how you evangelize. Is you are good people, you endure hard stuff, you're gracious and you're kind and you're everything Jesus taught you to be, and then you point others to God. You say you give that hope that is within you. And it all ties together. This is how we evangelize. And I think it's especially true that especially true in light of what he talked about over here in verse 10 through 12. Blessed are those who are persecuted. Blessed are you when others revile you, persecute you, and other all kinds of evil against you. What is the typical response to persecution? It's to hide. It's to shield yourself. It's to pull back. He's saying, don't change. Let your light shine. Let your light shine. And if you're persecuted for my sake, you will have your reward. So I hope that this has helped you. It's a great section of text, kind of the introduction to his everything he's going to talk about in the Sermon on the Mount. I hope to be with you soon, and that we can have our Bible studies normal, and where I can get your comments and your questions, your feedback as well. I don't as much like me just talking, but I hope this is helpful for you, that this kind of gets you in the Word and this gets you thinking that you can apply these things to your life. And as a final thought, I would want to leave you with this. Which one of these things do you need to get better at? If you can point out one of those things and say, I'm not that poor in spirit, I don't realize my dependence on God, or maybe I don't have that absolute mournfulness for my sin, or I'm not meek as I should, or I don't have that hunger and the thirst for righteousness like I should. I'm not merciful, I'm not pure, I'm not a peacemaker. I don't have enough courage to be persecuted, and when I am, I don't rejoice and I'm not glad. Which one of these do you need to work on in your life? Which one of these do you need to get better at it? And my encouragement for you is to work on it, to try and get better at it, to make it an effort in your life, to get better at whichever one of these you think is your weakness. And then by the time we get back together, I hope that you're stronger and you're more the Christian that you need to be, and the Christian that Jesus wants you to be, that you can be part of God's kingdom and you can have a place in his kingship. So I hope this has been a blessing to you. I hope y'all are doing well. Let us know if you need anything, and then we'll see you sometime. Have a good day.